Everybody's shy at this meeting. Nobody puts on their cameras. All right. I have one person putting on their camera. Hi, Lisa.
Hey, Steve.
I love talking to a blank screen.
I know my wife is student teaching these days, and that's all she does is talk to blank screens all day.
I'm tutoring like 10 hours a week with my kids, and I can usually get them to turn it on for a minute or two, and then they flip it back off again. And it's like, as long as you keep talking so that I know that you're there, I'm good.
Yeah.
And particularly I got a number of girls and a number of Muslim girls, and they don't want to wear the hijab. And I was like, I got it. That's cool. No problem.
Yep.
I'm going to give bonus points off to the first person who turns on the camera. All right.
I heard the tail end of it, so.
I said I was going to give bonus points off for the first person who turns on their cameras.
It's the world we live in.
Indeed. So have you guys been able to download Kahoot, the app? Got a yes? 2 yeses?
Yeah, I was able to.
Yeah, I have it on my phone.
I can't decide if this is going to take up more time than it's worth, and it might be. I may just do it in the poll instead. I think I probably will.
It's a gaming app or something, isn't it?
You can quizzes on it.
Yeah, we do quizzes on it, so you kind of have a certain amount of
gotcha.
time, and it gives you the answer to the quiz. Even Stacy won't turn on her camera.
Oh, I thought I had turned it on. Sorry. I was just walking in the rain a little bit ago, so I probably look like a wet rat.
There we go.
Never fails. I waited till after the downpour earlier, so I went out, and then halfway into my walk, it started pouring.
Well, that's going to happen from November to May. So
it is going to happen. Yes. Did you say you're going to use the Kahoot, or you're going to use the?
I think I'm just going to use the poll.
The poll. Okay.
Hey, Lisa, how come you're on here twice?
So I just got on my iPhone too. So I'm on my iPad, and then I'm just to be able to respond to the chat. I'm just pulled it up on my phone too.
You're very Cool.
All over it.
I was asked to do a task, so here I am.
I appreciate you being ready to do that task. So Lisa is going to be in charge of monitoring the chat room and bringing up any questions that need to be addressed
Absolutely.
during the session. And also putting your own 2 cents in if you got,
when she has good things to say.
Yeah, or even if you got bad things to say, particularly if it's about me, that's fine. And we've got somebody with their rule book open in front of the camera. I like that. That's good.
That's Zoe.
Zoe,
Well done.
Is that the first time you cracked it open?
No, I looked at it earlier a little bit.
Excellent. Stacy, do you have a way of taking attendance?
I'm doing that as we speak.
You're just looking at the gallery?
I have my little,
yeah. Okay.
I'll probably take some screenshots right before we're done.
Well, you know how to just go down to the bottom and hit participants, right? So you can just scroll through the participant list.
Yeah, that's probably a better way to do this.
Definitely.
Paul, Ava Bum. Nice. As long as everybody puts a reasonable name in, we're good.
Give it about 1 or 2 more minutes. We're going to start on time because we got a lot to do. So we'll see how it makes out. And
when you're done with your deal, Steve, can you ask the audience, for anybody who wasn't here last week at the intro meeting, to introduce themselves?
You want to do that at the beginning here?
You can do it at the end because I want to make sure your talk gets covered. You do it whenever you want to. I just want to make sure we get that done. How about that? But I don't
you or Lisa may need to remind me, but I'll be so engrossed in Rule 2 at that point in time.
Lisa, you have 2 tasks now.
Talking about correctable errors, it'll just be so enlightening that I'll forget everything else.
So is Drew Cox, Ron Cox?
You're muted, Drew, or Ron, or whomever you are.
That's correct. Sorry, I haven't been able to figure out how to change the title on the Zoom call.
Up at the top, there's 3 little dots. Click on them.
The top of your picture, or the top?
The top of your picture.
Okay.
And it should say rename. All right, we're going to get rolling. It's a little after 6:30. I am going to try my best to get this done in an hour. We're covering Rule 4, which is definitions, Rule 1, which has to do with the court and the equipment, and Rule 2, which has to do with officials and their duties. So in my opinion, Rule 4 is kind of the most important rule in the rule book. They're all important, but it's the most important rule in the rule book because if you don't know the definitions, it's hard to apply the rules. So we're going to start with rules knowledge. So if you know the rules, you are going to be able to be better at play calling. So a lot of officials want to get out and just be able to blow their whistle and call plays, but without having knowledge of the rules, it's impossible to be a good play caller. Without laws and powers to enforce them, the natural passion of men would be to revert to war. This is Thomas Hobbes, a 17th century philosopher. Without rules, games would be chaos, right? So the rules and learning the rules are kind of tantamount here. And it's a great time to be able to do that, given that we're going to have a hard time getting out on the court and working on play calling. So a great time to get into your rule book and be better at it. Rules knowledge has helped officials ensure fair and competitive contests, and it's impossible to accurately call plays without knowing what is legal. Okay, so I'm a big proponent of trying to know the rules. So instead of doing, whoa, get back here. Instead of doing my Cahoots quiz, I guess I can't do this while I'm sharing. I'm going to do the quiz at the end here, because I'm going to try to get through the rules here first. Okay. So rule 4, definitions. So for those of you who kind of remember David Letterman when he was doing late night television, if some of you have even heard of who David Letterman is, he had a top 10 list every night. And I've kind of picked out the top 10 rule definitions in rule 4. They're all important. But I went to kind of the ones that were maybe the most important. We don't have time tonight to go through everything. So I picked these 10, but that's not to say that you don't need to get through, number 1 through, I forget what the final number is here. Actually, I'm going to quickly flip over to it. So there's 48 rule definitions, and we're going to go through 20% of them. Okay. First one, ball location. Rule 4.4. Knowing when the ball is in the back court or in the front court. So the ball is in the back court when the player, I got a typo there. The player or the ball is in the back court. If either the player or the ball is in the back court. So ball's in contact with the player or the court is in a back court if either the player or the ball is in the back court. Conversely, during a dribble from the back court to the front court, the ball's in the front court only when the ball and both feet of the dribbler are in the front court. So you're bringing the ball up, you're dribbling over the division line, one of your feet is still in the back court, you have not gone into the front court yet. You can pull the ball back, you can go back into the back court, and you haven't established the ball in the front court yet. A ball in flight retains the same location as when it was last contacted with the player or the court. So for things like a 10-second count in the back court, you're counting and you're up to about 9, and the kid winds up and throws a long pass down the floor, and while the ball is in the air, you get to 10 and the ball's still in the air. That is a backcourt violation because the ball still has the same status as being in the backcourt, because that's when it was last contacted by the player. Ball is at the disposal of the player. This is for location as well. When it is controlled by a thrower or a free thrower, and the ball is handed or bounced to them. So, and again, this is for things like when we're establishing whether there's team control, and when we're establishing when we're putting a count down for getting the ball in play on a timely basis. So ball's at disposal when it's controlled by the thrower or the free thrower, when the ball's handed or bounced to them. Or if you place it on the floor at the throw-in spot. So if the team is late getting out onto the floor and you put the ball on the floor in the throw-in spot, that's the other time that the ball is at the disposal of the player. And finally, when the ball goes through the basket and the other team has taken the ball out of the bounds, when they are out of bounds and they're turned and they're ready to start making their throw inbounds, that's the third time that the ball is at the disposal of a player. So here's a couple of pictograms of balls in the front court or balls in the back court. The left pictogram, number 3, is still dribbling with the ball in the back court because I guess that's left foot, has yet to cross over and make contact in the front court. And play pick on the right-hand side, clearly the ball is in the back court as both the ball and the player are in the back court. All right, second rule. Any questions at all on that first rule? Second rule on my top 10 list is rule 412, player and team control. I'm flipping to 412 in my book. Okay, player control. When holding or dribbling the ball. So the player has control of the ball when he's holding the ball or dribbling the ball. and there's team control when the player of the team has control. So if a player on the team is holding or dribbling the ball, the team has control as well as the player has control. Or the ball is being passed between teammates, or there's been an interrupted dribble. So the dribbler dribbles the ball off their foot, it's rolling on the ground. It's still in the control of the team that was on offense at that time. And then finally, the player of the team has disposal of the ball for a throw-in. So the reason that this is important is it has to do, at least partially, with how you adjudicate fouls. So if there's a player control foul or there's a team control foul, no foul shots are awarded to the team that has been fouled, but rather they would just get possession of the ball. The other reason of knowing when there is player control is for timeouts. So you need to know that the player has control of the ball in order to be able to grant a timeout. So that's kind of the two real key reasons for knowing about control. And then when does team control then end? On a shot. So once the ball's in flight, nobody has control at that point in team. Neither team has control. Obviously, when the other opponent secures control, team control by that first team has ended, or the ball becomes dead. Team control ends.
Hey,
Any
Steve,
questions?
can I ask a quick question? And this is just from my own mind,
Yes,
but
please.
in terms of player and team control, so if it's still within the team control, yet it went off at that player's foot and it was rolling, could a timeout still be called, or does it have to be within player control to call a timeout versus team control?
Player control.
Okay.
And that's one of the things you can kind of watch us in games, and I would say it's one of the things that we're not always very good at. When that ball is on the floor and there's a scramble for the ball, and the coach of one of the teams, actually probably the coach of both of the teams, are screaming for timeout. Mm-hmm. You get it. The player has to have control before you can grant that timeout.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
And real quick, just so I'm clear, you're saying in a player or team control foul, there's no foul shot, just the ball out of bounds?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So the same thing there. There's the dribbler dribbles the ball off their foot. It's rolling down the floor. There's a scramble for the ball, and the dribbler kind of pushes the defender out of the way in order to be able to gain control of the ball, and the foul is called. There's no shots in that situation because it was a team control foul. You just award the ball to the foul counts in terms of foul call, but you just award the ball to the other team. You don't award free throws. Okay. 419 fouls. One of the and Rule 10 is what these fouls are and what the penalties are for fouls, but you need to kind of know what a foul is. So, what's a personal foul? Illegal contact while the ball is live, or on or by an airborne shooter when the ball is dead. So once the ball goes through the basket, the ball becomes dead. But if the airborne shooter gets fouled or creates a foul themselves, it can still be a foul even though the ball is dead. It can still be a personal foul even though the ball is dead. It's a nit, but you should just kind of know that. So when a player has not returned yet to the ground from shooting the ball, fouls can occur during that period of time, even though the ball's gone in the basket and the ball is therefore dead. Okay. And then there's a common foul or an intentional foul. A common foul is basically, again, a normal foul during the course of play with the ball live. That is not an intentional foul, essentially. All other fouls not being an intentional foul. So an intentional foul, and we think we know what it is by, seeing it. But intentional foul, it neutralizes an opponent's obvious advantageous position. One of the ones that you kind of see often is like on a breakaway. The player steals the ball and is starting to head toward the other basket, and the defender is able to just kind of reach out and grab. In high school, there's no such thing as a clear path foul like they have in the pros. But it would be an intentional foul, because something like that would be neutralizing an opponent's obvious advantageous position. They just stolen the ball and they're going in for a layup, and a player is just reaching out and grabs onto a jersey in order to neutralize that obvious advantageous position. Contact away from the ball with an opponent clearly not involved in the play. So you can kind of think about this as almost like the hack-a-shack rule, right? So you can't go and foul somebody on the other side of the floor that has nothing to do with a basketball play in order to make that poor free throw shooter, for instance, needing to shoot the free throws. So that would be considered an intentional foul. And then contact not legitimately attempting to play the ball of the player designated to stop or prevent the clock from starting. And again, so some of this is the strategic part of near the end of the game when, trying to foul to stop the clock or have the opponent shoot free throws and hopefully miss, get the ball back and be able to score and catch up. You need to be making a legitimate attempt to play the ball. Many years in the rule books, they have points of emphasis where the rule writers come along and say, here's what we need to make sure that the officials are really paying attention to this year. And this intentional foul, calling the intentional foul, is something that comes up quite frequently and is there this year. So you can't just go and like wrap your arms around the player at the end of the game and expect just a regular foul, common foul to be called, but rather you need to be making a legitimate attempt to play the ball or the player. And then finally, excessive contact with an opponent when the ball is live. So, a player driving in for a layup, somebody goes in to block the shot, or maybe not necessarily block the shot, prevent the player from scoring, runs into the player, knocks him to the floor. In the judgment of the official, it was excessive contact and warrants an intentional foul. So it's important to kind of understand and remember what an intentional foul is, so that when you see it in the game, you can kind of say, hey, that probably needs to be called an intentional foul. And there's nothing wrong with blowing your whistle, calling a foul, talking to your partner or partners and saying, was that intentional? Was that excessive contact? Was that not a legitimate play on the ball? And you can upgrade the call and decide it as an intentional at that point in time.
Steve?
Yes.
What's the penalty for the intentional foul versus just a common foul or a regular foul?
You're stealing Rule 10's thunder.
Uh-oh.
But so the penalties for an intentional foul is 2 shots, assuming there wasn't a 3-point try. It'd be 3 shots if it was a 3-point try that failed, but 2 shots, and then the ball at the point of interruption, basically where the foul occurred. So you would bring the ball in out of bounds. So you got 2 shots and the ball versus a common foul.
And Steve, I'm going to jump in here. One thing that's really important to know, that it's always 2 shots, always at least 2 shots on the ball, even if the basket goes in.
Right. So even if the 3-point shot goes in, 3-point shot, shooter gets knocked to the floor, we decide it wasn't a legitimate attempt to play the ball or it was excessive contact, you would score the 3 points, you'd give them 2 free throws, and you would award the ball out of bounds as well. So could be a pretty draconian penalty. And then another kind of foul is a flagrant foul. A flagrant foul can either happen it's either personal or technical. So kind of a personal foul is kind of happening while the ball is live, or a technical foul kind of when it's happening when the ball is dead. It's violent or excessive in nature. Or it's a non-contact. Yep. Yes.
Question for you. So when you were describing that before, so you're saying that there's a possible 7 to 9 point swing?
Well, so
when you call it
sure. If there's a 3-point shot, the shooter is fouled excessively, intentionally. The ball goes in.
Okay.
You give them 3 points. You give them 2 free throws, and you give them the ball.
So they can possibly score 9 to 10 points in just one play, basically.
I guess 8, unless they get fouled on another 3-point shot. So I guess you can get to 9.
If they miss the shot, do they just get the 3 points or 3 foul shots in the ball?
Correct.
Okay.
Hey,
Right.
excuse me, could whoever is asked that last question, whose ID is 1253, a telephone number, can you tell me who that is?
This is Antonio.
Antonio, thank you. Go ahead, Steve.
Cool. No, good questions. And thanks for interrupting, because I have to tell you, when you're doing this staring at a computer screen, I have absolutely no idea if we're getting through, or you're all just kind of looking at me with a blank face. So jump in with all questions for sure.
I have a question.
Okay. Yep.
So is like let's say like a shooting foul, would that be considered a common foul? And then if it's like how you said like deliberately stopping the advantage for the opponent, that would be like
an intentional foul.
An intentional foul. So shooting is a common foul, right?
Yeah, the act of the foul itself is just a common foul. Right?
Okay.
And then you can upgrade from there to where if it was excessive or deliberate, or not playing the ball or the player, or taking away their obvious advantage, then you might upgrade that foul and say it's no longer just a common foul, it's an intentional foul. Right. And now we're talking a little bit about the flagrant foul, which kind of takes it even one step further. Okay. Right. So, and that's what we're describing here. So, flagrant foul can violent or excessive in nature, or a non-contact foul for unacceptable behavior, depending upon the level of verbal abuse that perhaps is being voiced against either another player or against the official. It could turn into being a flagrant foul. And a flagrant foul means being disqualified from the game. I managed to not say ejection. Being disqualified from the game, that the player, if it's on the player would be removed from the contest. There was, again, foul shots being awarded, and the ball again to the team that had been offended. Okay. And then technical fouls. What all officials love it when you're not doing it yourself. Kind of looks cool out there that you're kind of putting people in their place. It's part of our toolbox. Needs to be used at certain points in times, but it'd be amazing how often you'll feel like, ooh, I don't want to do that. But know what warrants a technical foul. So foul by somebody who's not playing in the game, which is kind of, you're not going to see that really, honestly. A non-contact foul by a player. So kind of a verbal foul by a player. An intentional or flagrant foul while the ball is dead. So when the ball is dead, in all instances, except for when it's after a basket and the airborne shooter hasn't come to the ground yet, if it is a foul, if it rises to the level where you feel a foul needs to be called, it's a technical foul. Okay. There are no common fouls when the ball is dead. So it's either going to be a technical foul or no foul at all. You would ignore it. And then a technical foul might be a result of a coach protesting too strongly, or depending upon what he is saying to you. And then there are also indirect technicals to the head coach, because the head coach is responsible for whatever happens with his bench personnel. So when a kid on the bench swears at you, that kid gets a technical foul and the head coach gets an indirect technical foul. And there's a limit on the number of technical fouls that head coach can receive, either direct or indirect, before he's ejected from the contest. Okay, and you'll learn a little bit more about this, about that, the penalties in Rule 10 as well. But so technical, it's a foul that occurs when the ball is dead. For things like, there's a hell ball, two players, a hell ball, and they both jump up and one kid decides to just push the other kid. If the ball was live, you might just say that was a common foul. You might have said it was an intentional foul, but because the ball is dead, it would be considered a technical foul, right? So look, this stuff has got a lot of detail to it. You're not going to remember all this stuff in your first week of refereeing, but just let it try to sink into your head a little bit about the differences between common, flagrant, intentional, and technical fouls.
Hey, Steve, you have a question in the group chat.
Okay.
If a fight breaks out on the court, who can or can't step in?
So the coaches can basically step in, right? If a fight breaks out on the court, it used to just be only the head coach could jump in, but now the head coach and any of the assistants can jump in as well, to either break up the fight or even get out on the court before fight has happened, so be able to kind of avoid a fight. But no player can come off the bench and even just stand on the court without participating in the fight. That still is not allowed. Everybody okay with that?
Perfect.
Okay.
I have a quick question about that same thing.
Uh-huh.
What about spectators or like parents?
God.
Shoot 'em.
Exactly. They clearly are not allowed out of, and by the way, this is actually, you're making a very practical question. So in your first year, when you're refereeing third grade girls, and the parent comes out of the stand to break up the fight,
yeah,
they're not supposed to be there. And in a real game, you're supposed to get game management and tell them to leave the gym. But if all they're doing is helping separate two 7-year-olds from, swinging at each other, you're going to apply, the rule book is meant to be a little flexible in that type of situation. But the answer to your question is the parent comes out of the stands, they should be ejected from the gym by game management.
I only asked because that happened in the last tournament I was in.
and it probably wasn't them
funny.
separating two third graders and just trying to help.
No, it was two high schoolers, but it was helpful. They were separating them. So
yeah, that's still not.
Wasn't your mother, was it?
No. We were watching the game where it happened.
That's still not cool.
Bad.
I have one quick add-on, Steve. I'm sorry. Are you done, Ava?
Oh,
yeah, thank you.
I just had one quick add-on, and that is to try to figure out the difference between all these kinds of fouls. Look in your case book. Okay, there's all kinds of different examples of different kinds of fouls and which ones are common fouls and which ones are technical fouls. And most of that stuff's going to be under Rule 10. So you're getting a little bit ahead of yourself. But if you're really confused and you need some help, that's a good source.
Yep.
And the last thing I was just going to say on that, as Steve said, when you guys are reffing these third grade or fourth grade AAU games, it's always important when you get to the gym to find who game management is or who the gym manager is there. Because in these situations, you definitely want to go get them to kick the parent out. So you're not kicking the parent out or in a controversial situation. So.
Good point. Thanks, Joe.
So a question for you on that. This is Antonio. At the beginning of each game, doesn't game management and the referees meet at the table?
No, game, you'll in a high school game, you'll meet the coaches before the game at their bench, and you'll meet the team captains kind of in a captain's meeting. But the game management, you don't normally meet at the table. When you first walk into the gym is when you should meet game management, to understand who's in charge of the gym that day, and hopefully they're there to meet you. Is the real.
Yeah, that's what are they at the table? Do they make themselves known, or is there someone who's in charge there who will let you know, just in case that game management person doesn't show or isn't there? Do we have a process for, okay, this person's gonna be in charge, or is the game manager or the game management known? Is that person known, or is it just we'll just figure out when they get here?
So like a lot of things, the higher up you referee, the easier some of this stuff is. If you're doing a high school game, you're probably going to be pretty easy to be able to identify who the game management is. When you walk into your rec game on a Saturday afternoon and there are 3 courts running at the same time and they're running games 1 hour at a time and they're doing 7 hours worth of games, sometimes it's a little more chaotic and you need to make an effort to understand who's in charge of the gym. It doesn't necessarily have to be just your court, because there may be 2 or 3 courts going on, but you may have to yourself make a little bit of an effort to try to figure out who's in charge there. So, when you walk in the door and, there's people there like taking money or something, you could ask them, it's like, who's in charge here, and go up and introduce yourself to that person. A lot of times you need to make that effort yourself.
Gotcha.
Okay. All right, just kind of finishing up on rule 419, player control foul, fairly obvious, right? Committed by a player who's in control of the ball or the airborne shooter, again, right? So that's somebody who's dribbling or holding the ball and has control of the ball. Team control foul, we just talked about this, right? Committed by a player of a team in control. So you know the definition of what control is at this point in time. And then no free throws on player or team control fouls. And then all personal and technical fouls count toward team fouls to reach bonus free throws. So, you give a technical to a coach and their team had, 4 fouls, they now have 5 because you've given it a technical to the coach or a player. Does that make sense to everybody? So, and the bonus free throws are, at 7 free throws, you're shooting 1 and 1, and 10 free throws, you're shooting 2. 10 fouls, you're shooting 2 free throws.
So if there are 2 technical fouls, same incident, it would still be 2 fouls would be added to the count.
Correct. Right. Each foul counts toward the team foul counts.
If you got 2 technicals, would it be double the free throws too?
Yes. Yep. They're going to be additive. Okay. Guarding. Rule 423. There it is. So what does closely guarded mean? 6 feet or less. And if we were out on a court, we would be able to show you the diameter of the center circle, or the diameter of the free throw circle. So from the free throw line to the end of the circle is 6 feet. So if the front foot of the defender is within 6 feet of the ball handler dribbler, that would be considered closely guarded. We don't, again, as referees, I would say we oftentimes require players to get closer than 6 feet, but we need to all be better at realizing what 6 feet means, would be my editorial comment there. And then it's important to know what it means to obtaining and maintaining legal guarding position. And we use LGP often in our vocabulary. So what does it mean to gain legal guarding position will then impact if there is contact, who bears responsibility for the contact. So to obtain legal guarding position, you need to have both feet touching the playing court in bounds, because you're not on the playing court if you're out of bounds. And the front of your torso must be facing the opponent. So 2 feet on the floor, front of, facing the opponent, the offensive player, essentially. Okay. Once you have obtained, go ahead.
So that would basically start your count, if any, within that 6 feet, and the person's feet are towards the person. That would start your count. So if they were more than 6 feet, then whether they're pointing to the person or not, if they're not within that 6 feet, you cannot start your count.
That's true. That is, in order to be guarding, you need to be in a guarding position, and you need to be within 6 feet in order to be able to get your count. The obtaining legal guarding position is important for other things as well as the closely guarded count. For things like, was it a block or was it a charge, right? So, you see this all the time, and I've got a couple of clips here that you're going to be able to look at as to whether or not it's a charge or a block, or whether or not, just as there's contact between the offensive and defensive player, who is responsible for the contact, or who would the foul be on if there's contact. So that's the importance of legal guarding position. So once you've obtained legal guarding position, maintaining legal guarding position, your feet can actually be on the playing court or in the air. You no longer have to have them both feet on the ground. You no longer need to be facing the opponent. So to the extent that the opponent, you got a 6'9" guy driving down the lane on you, and you turn away to avoid being hit, that does not obviate whether you have legal guarding position or not. So you can actually turn away from facing your opponent, and then you can move in any direction really except forward. The rule book says laterally or obliquely, but basically you just can't be moving forward. So if you've obtained your legal guarding position and you're sliding and you get to the spot before the dribbler gets to that spot, you are still in legal guarding position. And it's something that you're going to have to see a lot of to know whether or not you have gotten to legal guarding position or not, or maintain legal guarding position when the contact is occurring. One of the toughest calls that you'll have to make as an official. And then you can raise your hands, or you can jump within your vertical plane. Again, your feet can be in the air and still be in legal guarding position. Okay, so you've gotten yourself set up in the middle of the lane. The drive's coming down the lane. You jump straight up in the air and you get run over. That would be a player control offensive foul. And again, kind of can turn or duck to absorb some contact. Okay. Guarding opponent with the ball, or the opponent is not moving. No time or distance was required to obtain legal guarding position. So as long as you get to the spot on the floor and get your 2 feet down and your torso facing the ball handler dribbler, if that contact is made instantaneously thereafter, that foul should be called on the ball handler dribbler as a player control foul. So you don't have to jump in and give play time or distance to be able to. You do have to obtain legal guarding position before the opponent leaves the floor. So if they're up in the air, if they've left the floor, not gathered to get off the floor, but actually if their foot has left the floor, you need to have established your obtained your legal guarding position before that has occurred in order to be legal. So if you're guarding someone who doesn't have the ball, you're trying to pick up a foul on somebody who's running down the floor and just not paying attention, you do in fact need to give time and distance required to obtain the legal guarding position. So players running down the floor, he's actually looking back for maybe a pass and you step in front of them. You need to be able to give that player the ability to stop and change direction to avoid the contact. Right, give time and distance in order to avoid the contact. No more than 2 steps. So, jump there, 1, 2, bang, he runs into you, that would be a player control foul. But jumping in front of somebody who's just running down the floor and takes 1 step, turns, looks at you, and runs smack into you at that point in time, you've not given them the time and distance to stop and avoid the contact. And that would not be a legal guarding position. And the foul should be called on, the defending player. Everybody kind of get that?
Yeah, I'm sure everybody got all that.
Yeah, no. Toughest stuff. This is some of the toughest stuff that you'll have to work on and see in order to understand it. But without knowing what the rule is, when you see it, it's hard to sit there and say, okay, that's what happened, and this is what I need to apply.
I have a question.
Yep.
Is there such thing as a restricted area, or is that only on the pro level?
No restricted area in high school basketball yet.
Okay. So if someone's standing under the hoop and they just took a charge, it would still be a charge?
Yeah, you can be directly under the basket. You can be behind the basket and still in bounds. And if all the rest of the requirements for being in legal guarding position has been met and you get run over, it is a player control foul, an offensive foul.
Okay.
Okay, a couple of quick clips.
This legal guarding position stuff is probably, I think, the most important thing to understand for any official, especially for a first-year official. If this is the only concept that you can wrap your head around over time, then you're doing a good job.
What did I do here? I just messed something up. Sorry about that. Let me.
It's okay.
Get back in. Let's see. Okay, here's my first clip. So watch the defender.
Anybody have any opinions? Like the call? You're all sleeping?
So
I
one
like
team
it.
and a bump, right?
No need for time and distance, right? The ball was there. You just need to have your 2 feet on the floor facing. Here comes, okay, here's a closely guarding clip. Within 6 feet. Okay.
Steve, I don't think I've rarely ever seen that kind of a call made.
Yeah, what is
You've
what do you
rarely
do
seen the
wrong?
5-second call made? Is that what you just said?
Yeah.
Oh, I think you see quite a bit of 5-second calls made.
And you don't see it so much at the lower levels because they can barely dribble for 5 seconds. But as you move up and the ball skills get a little better and the kid, sometimes it happens. I mean, I've called plenty of them.
Well, even if the ball is dead, then you can call 5 seconds, right? If they're just holding the ball.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that again. What was that again?
If you pick up your dribble and you're just holding the ball, you can get a 5-second call for that too, right?
Correct. Right, and it used to be in the girls' game that it would be only that when you were holding the ball and not dribbling. But this year they've actually changed the rules, so it is either when you're holding the ball or when you're dribbling the ball, and it actually can be up to like almost 15 seconds, right? So you can hold the ball for 4+ seconds without getting a violation. You can then start dribbling for 4+ seconds without getting a violation, and then you can stop your dribble, hold the ball for another 4+ seconds without getting a violation. But it's a 5-second count. If you're doing any one of those things, you get to 5 seconds, it's a violation.
So Steve, there's a good question online that says, if the ball is tipped and loose, do you restart the 5 seconds? So in that clip, it kind of looked like the dribbler fumbled it a little bit, kind of left to right. So didn't restart the count in that situation, but when the ball is kind of knocked loose, does that restart it?
It needs to be player control. So the player needs to be dribbling or holding, which is the two definitions of you having player control. So to the extent that the player has lost control, that would stop the 5-second count.
So in the previous one, are we saying that the guy on the offensive did not lose control of the ball?
That is what the official said.
Okay.
So question: if you're dribbling the ball, say for instance, there's a minute left or little time on the clock, and they're trying to run the clock out. The person can just dribble around the court. Now you can't call it unless they're not going towards the basket, or no, how does that work?
Is if you're within 6 feet, if you're defending and you're within 6 feet of that player who's dribbling, and you're there for 5 seconds, it's a violation at that point in time. There's no longer anything in terms of like penetrating inside the 28-foot line or whatever the heck it was way back when. It's just a matter of being closely guarded within 6 feet.
But then Steve, if they pass that defender with their hips and their torso, right, then that would reset it.
If you get past with their head and shoulders, the count would stop.
Right.
Hey, Oren, I want you to go back to one quick thing you said a bit ago. You said if the ball becomes dead, like when a player is holding the ball, you don't know this now, but that's really a live ball. That's not a dead ball. So eventually we're going to get to the definition of what's a live ball and what's a dead ball. But I just wanted to let you know that when a player's holding the ball, it's a live ball. I just had to throw that out there, Steve.
Yeah, that's my bad. Sorry. Dead ball is when it's out of bounds, right? Stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah, there's several.
Essentially when the whistle blows.
Yeah, sorry.
Or when a basket is made.
Yeah, my bad. Sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to clarify.
Well, okay, I think that's the player's terms versus the officiating term, right? When the ball is picked up after a dribble, it's dead, but officially it's not dead.
That's true, Lise.
Good point. All right, so Rule 424, which is called the legal and illegal use of hands and arms, which I tend to kind of remember as being kind of freedom of movement for the players. And there's a big emphasis in the game of letting the game flow more, right up into the NBA, with more freedom of movement, right? So it's not legal to use your hands, hips, shoulders, arms, blah, 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 to force your way through a screen or to hold a screener. It's not legal to use your hands on an opponent that inhibits their freedom of movement. So you can't just kind of like grab on and like get in their way and not allow them to go where they want to go on the floor. It's not legal to extend your arms fully, such that freedom of movement is hindered when contact with arms occur. So boxing out, for instance, right? So when you're boxing out and you're spreading your arms out to the side, so you're not allowing the player behind you to get around you by using your arm to do that, not legal. Maybe different from the way we learned to box out way back when, but not legal now. Not legal to swing your arms and elbows excessively. That makes sense. Not safe. Also not legal. And this is basically hand checking. So it used to be that we talked about is the touching and holding affecting a ball handler's rhythm, balance, speed, or quickness. And now it is kind of mandated that these are things that are not legal and will cause you to have a foul call. If you place, as a defender, you place two hands on the ball handler dribbler. So you reach out as a defender and you put two hands on the ball handler dribbler, it's a whistle. It's a foul. No questions asked in terms of why. If you put an arm bar, an extended arm bar on the ball handler dribbler, it's a foul every single time. It's a foul. If you place and keep a hand on the ball handler dribbler, so you're trying to kind of hold them off with your hand, it's a foul every single time. And if you contact the ball handler dribbler more than once with the hand, and I was actually looking at that 5-second closely guarded clip, and it was pretty darn close as to whether or not the defender actually touched the ball handler dribbler a couple of times with his hands. It's a foul every single time. And it's really important for people who are brand new officials to get this stuff down, because the 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, when they get cured of this problem, they don't start continuing, or they don't continue to do it when they're in 8th, 9th, and 10th grade and beyond. And there's a real emphasis on us making sure that there's this freedom of movement with the ball handler dribblers particularly, but both outside and in the post. Okay, so bring your shit to the front, stop shit. Sorry. Okay. Right, making it hard for the player to cut through the lane. This is a game that's going to go south fast if this whistle isn't blown on these cutters.
You guys all see that?
Yep.
You know, if you didn't see the whole thing, you might be tempted to say, well, she just ran over her defender. Well, something happened before that.
So in that one, if her hands weren't extended and she slid her feet over, would that be more?
Here's somebody who's with aggressive defense. And I would question the official being in a good position. He almost got run over, but.
Steve, can you stop the video or pause the video for a second?
Sure.
Somebody was asking a question about the previous video. Who was that?
That was me. So my question was, I think the rule was that you can't extend your arms, right? So if she didn't extend her arms and slid her feet, would that be more of a questionable call for a charge rather than blocking?
The previous call, right?
If she got to her spot, if she got to the spot on the floor before the offensive player got to that spot on the floor,
right,
and she had gotten her feet on the ground and her body, her torso facing the offensive player, then yeah, that would have been an offensive foul.
Well, the offensive player also used her arm to clear, but after the defensive player had put her arm out, she had actually used her arm to clear clear the defender, but it was afterwards. So
right. So once that defender has that arm extended away from her body, that's no longer a legal guarding position, right? And it's impacting freedom of movement for the offensive player, and that's going to be a foul on the defense player each and every time, right? Or if her hands are in close to her body and she has her body in front of the offensive player, and that offensive player runs into her or pushes off with her own arm, then that would be a player control foul. Make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Alrighty. Oop. Okay, rebounding. To obtain legal rebounding position, a player may not displace, charge, or push an opponent. All right. So again, the rebounding of, put your butt into the player and then push backwards and, box them out of the play. That is not legal, right? You can't displace the opponent. You can't extend your shoulders, your knees, your arms, other than vertically, to hinder freedom of movement, kind of the same kind of concept that we were talking about in section 24. You can't bend your body abnormally to hold or displace an opponent, kind of the same thing, sticking your hips out, your legs out, or whatever, to be able to keep the opponent behind you. And you can't violate the verticality. So everybody has the right to their position on the floor. And if you kind of go penetrating into that vertical area that player has the right to, that is not legal. Every player is entitled to a spot on the playing court, providing the player gets there first without illegal contact. Okay, quick VLC here. Let's finish it. There we go. There we go. Yeah, that's my next clip. Hang on a second. Stop. Okay, what's a legal screen? Rule 440. Screening can face any direction. Time and distance are relevant. If you're screening it, this is almost the same thing as kind of with the ball handler, dribbler, and getting to legal guarding position, right? If you're screening a stationary opponent from the front or the side, effectively that the opponent can see you, you just need to stop short of contact. You can get right up to the opponent and screen. If you're screening somebody from behind, you got to allow one normal step before contact. So when you back screen somebody, you can't back screen right next to their body, but rather you need to leave a step before contact. And if you're screening a moving opponent, again, you need to give them time and distance to be able to stop or change directions in a 2-step maximum. Very similar to kind of legal guarding position. And screens must be stationary, or they can be moving as long as they're in the same path and direction as the opponent. And the screener must stay within their vertical plane. So you can't have a big wide stance with your legs spread far apart. You need to have your stance kind of shoulder width apart. Okay, some quick screening clips.
There was just a chat question. Can they stick their butt out like they do in the NBA when they're
Exactly. No.
no?
All right, just a couple.
Is that legal?
Yes.
Okay.
They just said it was.
Well, that doesn't mean anything.
Right? She gave them plenty of time and distance to make that. Okay, here's the next one.
Don't ever assume that just because a ref calls something in a video or not, that it's the right call.
Right? She was standing there, gave the white player plenty of time to see her. Excellent call by the C official, one of ours.
Do you know why that call was made? Does everybody know why this is illegal?
The hip went out.
Hip went out and the legs were spread wider than what you were talking about, vertical
shoulder
smooth.
Correct. They were wider than shoulder width.
And the knee went out, I thought.
Yeah. Basically, she used her knee to screen instead of using her body to screen.
So will all the games be in slow motion so it's easier to find that out?
Absolutely. And you can have them replay it a couple of times.
Yeah.
So Steve, you got a couple questions in the chat.
Okay, go ahead.
So one says, that's okay. One says, if they are moving on the same path but slower, isn't that a foul?
Well, again, if you you've established your screen, and then you're moving slowly in the same direction as the defensive player, it's not a foul.
Yeah,
as long as you're moving in the same direction.
Yeah, that question might need a little more meat around it to see what you're going after. There's another question here. Where do moving screens come into play, though?
Meaning, where do legal moving screens come into play?
Emma, can you explain that question?
I was just thinking because in both the other videos you showed, it looks like their feet were like moving. But like, how do you tell if it's like a moving screen to make that call?
So the moving screen is really where you're moving to kind of get into the path of who you're trying to screen, and you're getting there too late. So again, if you're screening an opponent who's not moving at all, you kind of don't have that problem because they're not moving, so you don't have to worry about getting into their path. If you're screening somebody who is moving, you've got to give them the opportunity to stop and change direction. So if you're sliding off to the side and they're making contact with you without them having a chance to stop or change direction, that's going to be a foul on you. It's going to be an illegal screen.
Yeah, that verbiage, that moving screen thing a screen is either legal or illegal. That moving screen is kind of a misnomer. Is that clear as mud, Emma?
Yeah, thanks.
All right, throw in rule 42 or section 42. So a throw-in count begins when the ball's at the disposal of the thrower. They've got 5 seconds to release the ball out onto the floor, and when the ball is at the disposal of the thrower is when the count starts. And the count ends when the ball is released by the thrower onto the court. Okay, so it doesn't have to be touching anybody onto the court yet. It's just it needs to be out of the thrower's hand. And then the throw, and by the way, you're going to be doing a lot of this in your first year, getting the ball in play and making your 5-second count. So this is something that you'll be familiar with pretty quickly. Throw-in ends when the ball's touched by a player inbounds or out of bounds. A throw-in team commits a violation. And the reason that that's important is when you learn about alternating possession arrows, the alternating possession arrow changes when the throw-in ends, and those are the time frames when the throw-in ends. And then where does a player need to stand when they're throwing in? The designated throw-in spot is 3 feet wide with no depth limit, right? So you don't have to stand in one little spot. You've got the ability to kind of stand within 3 feet, and you can go backwards as far as you're capable of doing before you run into a wall or a stands or something along the line. So the thrower must keep 1 foot on or over the designated spot until releasing the ball. Traveling and dribbling rules are not in effect during a throw-in. So, somebody can be doing, shuffling their feet or whatever, and you'll hear people screaming about that's a travel, and there's no such thing as traveling during a throw-in.
But they cannot drop the ball or dribble. Is that correct? Then it's out of play. You have to restart.
They could dribble. They drop the ball, they drop it off their foot, and it rolls onto the floor. That's not legal. But they can actually dribble. There's no dribbling rules in a throw-in.
Okay.
All right, rule 44. We're running a little over time, but I'm going to try to make it here, and we're going to get through rule 1 and 2 in about 3 minutes. So. Traveling, another real important rule. You'll learn the rule, and in your first couple of, your first year, you're going to be doing a lot of younger kid games, and you'll learn to ignore the rule to some extent, but at least you'll know it when you're ignoring it. So the big key on traveling is knowing what the pivot foot is, and knowing how the pivot foot is being established. So a player catching a ball with both feet on the ground, either foot can be the pivot foot. Player dribbling or catching a ball while moving, if both feet are off the floor and land on both feet, again, either can be the pivot foot. If first 1 foot, then the other foot both land, the first to land is the pivot foot. So you kind of catch the ball, you land on 1 foot, and then the other foot comes down. The first to land is the pivot foot. If 1 foot, the player can jump off the foot and land with both feet simultaneously, a jump stop, and then you're done. You no longer have a foot that can become a pivot foot at that point in time. So if you're off the floor, land on 1 foot, jump off that foot, land on both feet, that's all legal, but then you're done. You can't, you no longer have a pivot foot. And if 1 foot is on the floor, if the second foot touches, the first foot is the pivot foot. The player can jump off the foot and land again with both feet simultaneously in a jump stop. And then neither feet can move again and become a pivot foot. This rule takes some visualization. You really need to kind of get out on the floor and realize, work really hard on being able to establish what the pivot foot is and when they can move that pivot foot. So again, a couple of clips here. right? You see this play all the time, especially as the kids get older.
Which foot is this pivot foot? Anybody want to tell me?
Anybody got a guess on which foot the pivot foot is, and whether that play was legal or not?
Can you replay it?
You're going to see it again.
Left foot.
Left, yeah.
There you go. Left foot, picks it up, puts it back down.
This next angle, so we have an angle from the end line, which is going to be actually a great angle on this.
Pivot foot.
This is another call that we are not good at collectively as officials. Here's a great angle of this.
That should be a travel every time, but you hardly ever see it called.
We are not good at it.
Okay, so that was a travel. Okay, that's what I thought they were saying that was legal.
The reason it's a travel is he established a pivot foot and then he lifted it and he put it back down.
Yeah,
and that's exactly
what I thought too.
That's exactly what this is saying right now. So it's paramount to know what foot is the pivot foot. It may be lifted but not returned to the floor before the ball is released for a shot or pass. And it can't be lifted at all before the start of a dribble. A player holding a ball but not dribbling may not touch the floor with any part of his body except the hand or foot, right? So you see players holding the ball and falling down and referees calling traveling. That's the part of the rule that is the reason for that. So after gaining control while touching the floor with other than a hand or foot, may not attempt to get up or stand unless you're dribbling, right? So if you're on the ground, you dove for the ball, you're on the ground, you grab the ball, you can't stand up unless you start your dribble before you're starting to stand up. And if you're on the floor and are on your back, you can sit up without traveling. But if on your stomach, you can't like get up onto your knees, that's a travel. And you can't roll over, you know, in an attempt to get away from a player or something, that would also be considered a travel. Traveling is an important rule to be able to understand and know.
You know, one of the I have to say one more thing about a travel though, Steve, I'm sorry, is that if a player dives for a loose ball and gains control and just keeps sliding, that is not a travel, unless they do any of those things that Steve said on the previous slide. People want that to be a travel. It's not a travel.
Okay, last of my top 10 definitions, verticality. So you must have legal guarding position must be obtained and maintained. The defender can jump and occupy space in the vertical plane. Hands and arms can be raised within the vertical plane. And the player with the ball has no more protection or consideration than the defender. So we don't want to penalize good defense where the defender gets there and is in legal guarding position and jumps straight up in the air to defend the play. And then the offensive player kind of runs into their arms or something that are lifted straight up in their vertical plane. That is not a defensive foul. It may be a no call, or if it's anything, it would be a player control offensive foul, but it's not considered a defensive foul in those situations. Does everybody kind of visualize what that means? You know, get to your legal guarding position, jump straight up in the air, arms are straight up in the air, and don't have too fine of a line there in terms of whether the arm is straight up in the air or not. What gets players into trouble is then they bring their arm forward, and that becomes they're no longer in their vertical plane, and then that becomes a foul on the defensive player. But if they keep their arms straight, great defense, and we shouldn't be penalizing that great defense. And a quick clip here. This was a tough clip. I couldn't quite decide if it was a
all ball.
Well, there's two defenders.
Kind of checks him on the body on the drive though a little bit now.
Let the
With
boys
the hip.
play.
Yeah, like I said, don't always believe videos you see are the correct call.
That looks pretty clean.
All right, here comes one last verticality call here. Notice the coach chewing on the lousy lead official for letting that play go as a verticality play, but
Great no call.
I thought so too.
Who is that great? Who is that great ref out there?
Who was that great referee out there? Hang on a second. All right, so that gets us through Rule 4. I am going to blow through Rule 1 and 2 for you, and I'm going to get out of here about 15 minutes late, and I apologize for that. Okay, so Rule 1 is court and equipment. For the most part, my recommendation is going to be play with what you got out there. You're not about to start measuring whether the lines are in the right places or whatnot along the line. The key things in Rule 1 that you might want to worry about in your first year is make sure you're playing with the right basketball, right? So there's two different size basketballs. The high school boys use the bigger 29.5 circumference ball, and the girls and most youth use 28.5 circumference balls, right? So especially like in high school games, sometimes we're doing one girls game and then one boys game, and it won't be the first time that the wrong ball was used in the wrong game. But same thing with the youth game. Make sure you know whether they're using a smaller ball, or maybe if you're doing an 8th or a 9th grade boys game, they've decided to use the bigger ball. Get the ball right at the start of the game. Know what the coaching boxes should be. The coaching box is technically from the end line to 28-foot line that the coach can wander around in. Even when you're doing some rec games along the line, while you might give more latitude to those coaches because there's no lines and the benches are jammed together and whatnot, know in your mind that the coaches shouldn't be like 15 feet out onto the floor or over the half court line or anything along those lines. Understand the area that the coach is supposed to stay within, and the timeout area as well. And then the last one is they put an X in front of the scorer's table. You won't see them in your Saturday morning rec games, but that's kind of where the players are supposed to stand in order to be beckoned onto the floor for substitutions. And it helps you kind of control the game to make sure that the kids are at the table and not just jumping off the bench and trying to come into the contest, even in your rec games. And then that's all you need to know about Rule 1. And then Rule 2, officials and their duties. The thing I put in red here, which we talked about earlier, is you've got an issue with spectators, talk to game management. Jill kind of said this as well. Don't get yourself involved with, hey buddy, you need to get out of here because you're, disturbing our game or something, right? So the officials are responsible for penalizing unsporting contact by team members or coaches. The game management is responsible for handling the fans, and that will help you a lot. Look at Rule 2.9 about signals, and then we're going to be practicing them over the next several weeks, so you'll know them. You can look at 2.9, and you can look at your mechanics manual, and you can look at the back of the rule books as well. And then Rule 2.10 talks about correctable errors, and what I would say to first-year officials about correctable errors is don't have them, if at all possible. But if you do have them, and it's mostly about, oops, we screwed up on free throws. We should have either been giving somebody a free throw and we didn't. We put the ball in out of bounds, or vice versa. We gave them free throws and they didn't deserve to have the free throws. Occasionally, the times that you'll shoot at the wrong basket or the wrong player will shoot, is less often than you might have one of those other situations. And figure out if you do that. And then the last one, there's a fifth possible correctable error, and that's if you've erroneously failed to count or counted a basket. And a lot of times that has to do with whether it was a 2-point shot or a 3-point shot. And then you need to know what time period you can correct it in. From a rule standpoint, again, if you're refereeing a 3rd grade game and somebody says, so whoa, wait a minute, we should have been shooting free throws, you may decide to go do it anyway, even though you would know in the rule in terms of whether or not you've had the time, you've found the error within the time frame to be able to correct it. And this chart kind of will get you through when you're able to correct the error. And essentially, if you kind of think about it, you've awarded free throws and you shouldn't have awarded free throws. The other team, after the free throws are finished, takes the ball out of bounds. They go down the floor. The ball goes out of bounds again. They put the ball back in play again. You kind of even know then that it is too late to be able to correct the error at that point in time, kind of almost intuitively. But you should learn the time frame in which you're able to correct the error. Correctable errors scared the hell out of me in the first couple of years. Frank, I still don't like them. And the thing I would try more than anything is to not screw up the correctable errors, which means I know how many I know what the team foul count is. I've got it in my mind is like, okay, it's at 5 now. There was another foul at 6. We should be shooting on the next one. So you don't mess up when they're supposed to be shooting free throws. And make sure you get the right free throw shooter along the way. And if you're able to do both of those two things, you probably don't need to have this rule down cold in your first year or so, but know that it's there. And that's kind of the important pieces of Rule 2. All right, so that was a lot in, unfortunately, an hour and 20 minutes, and I thank you guys for hanging in there. If you got any more questions, feel free to ask. We'll be going, you got a quiz to take on rules 4, 1, and 2. That's due in a week, right? We're not doing it
Correct.
next session. We're doing it the following Tuesday. So Stacy, maybe you can describe how they get into
thanks, Steve. I that was a lot of content, and she did a really good job. I appreciate it. That much less talking for me to do. So the quizzes that go along with the rules that Steve went over just now are available from the Apprentice website that I sent you the address for. It's the one that starts with bit.ly. If you don't know what that is and you don't know what I'm talking about, please shoot me an email or a text, and I will get you sorted out. All the quizzes are there available under one of the tabs, 2 of the tabs actually. So just find the ones that are for rules 1, 2, and 4. Don't just answer the first 3, because then you're only going to get rules 1, 2, and 3. We want 1, 2, and 4. Okay. And then I'll get notified once you send those in. And then next week we'll go over the questions that most of you had a hard time with. Okay. Or you guys can come with questions. If you have specific questions about some of the questions in the quiz, feel free to come with that, because that's how we learn. Okay.
It says you need permission. This form.
Yeah, I'm running into that too.
You need permission to do what?
To take the quiz.
Huh.
It's saying that for me too.
Yeah. So when I went to quiz 1, I just assumed it was quiz 1.
Hold on. Let me see.
It says this form can only be viewed by users in the owner's organization.
Yeah, that shouldn't be there. I'll tell you what. I know what the problem is, and I'll get it fixed, and I'll send you an email, tonight or tomorrow to let you know it's good.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for bringing that to my attention.
And so the last thing I would say about the rest of the rule presentations that you have for the other 3 or 4 sessions that we do on rules is this is probably the densest one. The getting through the definitions will be the densest rule review that you're going to need to do. 9 and 10, 9's violations, and 10 is fouls will also have some level of detail to it, but you probably won't have to slog it through quite as much as you had to do it tonight. So thanks for hanging in there for that.
Yeah, are you guys all good? I think I have a list of everybody who attended tonight, and if you know somebody who's doing this class and they weren't able to participate tonight, the recording is going to be available on the website along with the one from last Thursday, which is already posted. So you can always go back if your head is swimming and you want to listen to Steve again, feel free to go back and listen and see what students you can pick up. Okay, great job, you guys. We'll see you on Thursday. I think there was an assignment to look over a couple pages in the mechanics manual. So do that and you'll be one step ahead. If you still need books, make sure you contact me so we can figure out how that's going to happen. And I think that's all. I'm going to ask that the staff people stay online for a bit, but everybody else feel free to sign off and have a good one.
Thank you.